It's that time of year to get your seeds started. With the weather out today, you know spring is here. Laura Davis runs Western Nursery's Farmers Market, and she and her husband own Lifelong Farm, an organic CSA here in Hopkinton. Laura will present seed starting tips for us today, so let's get started.
My name is Laura Davis. I'm the farmer from Long Life Farm in Hopkinton. Did everybody know we had a farm in Hopkinton? No. Nobody knew? Okay. I'm pleased to be here. I feel like I'm back home. We've been having a farmer's market here at Western Nurseries once a month since December. So if you haven't visited all the wonderful food producers and artisans at the farmer's market, our next one will be April 20th. But we're really happy to have all of you gardeners here to talk about seed starting. I grow on about 2¼ acres, so a fairly small scale for vegetable growers. But we grow for 90 families through a farm share, and we also sell our products at the Hopkinton Farmers Market, which is on Sundays during the summer from June through October in the afternoon. And I also sell vegetables at the Ashland Farmers Market, which is on Saturdays from June through October. So you can come and pick up some veggies there. Seed starting is a lot of fun, and I think a lot of people get frustrated when they seed start because their seedlings either don't germinate or they get very leggy. And so there's a couple of tips that I'm hoping to share with you today that will hopefully make you successful when you're growing your plants. Plants can be pretty versatile, and they can take a lot of abuse sometimes, but temperature and light are definitely important factors. So what I thought we would do is talk a little bit first about our hardiness zone. This has been changing over the decades, and we currently are 6A in Hopkinton. And so if I had asked you, maybe people might have said 5, but we are definitely warming. And it used to be farmers used to plant their garlic, and gardeners used to plant their bulbs, mid-October. And now it seems like we have to wait until the beginning of November because it's so much warmer. We don't want those to sprout and then get frozen and die off. So the hardiness zone is definitely something to think about when you're buying plants, especially perennials. But it also has a lot to do with overwintering things that you can grow to eat, like garlic and onions, and some people do overwinter carrots as well. So our last frost date generally is between the middle of April and the end of April, so 15th to the 30th. And that's something that you need to take into consideration when you're starting your seedlings. Not that you're putting stuff outside at that date, but you'll want to plan ahead to ensure that you are growing your plant so it'll be ready to go outside when it can go outside. So after the last frost date, and it could be wrong, it could be May 10th. So you just never know. You really have to watch the weather very carefully. So I check the weather several times a day to look what the 10-day forecast is so that I can see what the low temperature is out there. It's very important because you don't want all of that hard work on your seedling growth to get outside and then be frozen. So that's an important concept. So the last frost date is what we calculate. I always take there's a range, April 15th to April 30th. I take the latest date, and then I plan from there. Okay? And the other end of the spectrum is the last frost date, which our calendars say it's somewhere between the 16th and the 30th in October. We've always had, generally, except for last year, we usually have a frost around the first week in October. So it's never correct. You just really have to watch it very carefully to ensure your plants aren't damaged. But a key growing point is the soil temperature. If you put stuff out too early and it doesn't like the soil temperature, it's not going to grow. It's just going to sit there and do nothing. So 55 degrees is kind of the temperature that we like the soil to be at before our seedlings get out there. Okay, so our last frost date, and there's a lot of different seed calculators online that you can use. Has anybody heard of Johnny's Selected Seeds? Okay, they sell seeds, but they sell a lot of tools, and they have some great calculators that you can use online as little cheat sheets. So you can actually put in your last frost date, and it will tell you when to plant everything, which is really convenient. Okay? Can I see a show of hands of who's actually starting their own seedlings right now? A few of you? Okay, and how many want to start their own seedlings? Okay, great. That's good to know. Okay, so the timing. So timing is really critical. I hear people all the time tell me, oh, I already started my tomatoes and it's January. It's way too early, unless you're going to continue to enlarge its pot, okay, so it doesn't get root bound. But generally, our tomatoes are almost the last thing that we start in our seedling operation. So if you think about it this way, all of those warm summer plants, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, ground cherries, those really do need to be started later. And generally, we seed them, and we've already seeded our peppers and eggplants. The tomatoes are going to be seeded this week, so we haven't started our tomatoes yet. And you'll notice on this log, I've grouped the plants together. So tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, ground cherries, they need a total of 8 weeks of growing time before you put them in the ground. So if you think about soil temps, it's not really going to be around 55 until around Memorial Day. So if you think about Memorial Day as your warm seeding time to plant your vegetable plants, or some of your flowers too that are very sensitive to cold. So you're going to back up on those dates. If you need 8 weeks to plant and you're not going to plant out until Memorial Day, when are you going to start your seeds? Right now. So it's 2 months basically right now until Memorial Day. So that would give you 8 weeks to plant. So the seeding would take place now or in the next week or so. If you're not in a hurry to plant at Memorial Day, you can still continue planting your tomato and eggplants at least until about mid-June. Any later, then you're going to get into that frost date in October, and you may not get a crop. You'll get some tomatoes, but peppers may not turn colors, and eggplants don't like it cold at all. So sometime between Memorial Day and mid-June is a good time to plant all of these crops. So 8 weeks is what we generally say for these types of plants. So when we're seed starting, I brought some trays that I use, but you can certainly use anything you have at home, from egg cartons to some of these nice biodegradable pots are great too. It depends upon how much you're actually seeding. This is a tray that I use for all of my tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. And they get filled with soil. And so the reason I brought this is so you can see how small this is. I plant 20 to 25 seeds in each row. 20 to 25 seeds. Because all I'm really doing is trying to germinate them. They're not going to grow up big in this tray. After 2 weeks, I'll take the little plants out of this tray and put them in a bigger pot. That's called potting up. And this is the size they go into. Okay? So you don't need a lot of space. If you start in a egg carton, you could put 6, 8, 10 seeds in a little cell. And then after 2 weeks, you put them in a bigger pot. Okay? Yes?
When you put them in the bigger pot, do you still only put one?
Yes. When you go into the bigger pot, you're just going to put one plant. Okay? And you're going to plant that stem as deep as you can go. So you're going to want to continue to see those little true leaves at the top. Those shouldn't be buried, but the stem you can bury as deep as you can. And that really helps when you have leggy seedlings, when you're potting them off to bigger pots, to ensure that you don't get leggy seedlings that won't be strong enough. Okay? So potting up to a bigger pot is critical. So if you start your tomatoes in January, this is probably the first phase, and then you would go bigger and bigger and bigger every couple of weeks with tomatoes. Okay? So the germination piece of this, these plants, is critical for, in terms of temperature. So this tray actually will be on a heat lamp. And I heat the, sorry, not a heat lamp, but a heat pad. And I'll pass this around. This is the type I'm talking about. The heat mat will enable you to heat your soil up because those summer plants need between 75 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit to germinate, okay? And then they will germinate within a week to 10 days. A week generally, and then another week, then you'll pop them up into bigger trays. So 75 to 85 degrees is what you need for tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and ground cherries, and some flowers too. It's really important for you to read the seed packet because on there it will tell you exactly if it needs heat for germination. Okay, so that's really important. Well, this one says at least 60, but they're wrong. It'll take a very long time to germinate at 60. So we want to do it efficiently, and 75 to 85 is what most professional growers use for germination. And if you, some of us get a little fancier than others, and we put, I have that I use in the kitchen. I have an instant read thermometer, and I test that soil once it has had a chance to heat up to make sure it's between 75 and 85 degrees. Okay? Okay. So those are the only seeds that really need heat. Okay. When we grow onions, shallots, leeks, and scallions, which a lot of people grow with, with those little starts, little bulbs that you can buy, and that's good too. That saves you some time. But it's very easy to grow onions and scallions. Oh, I forgot to say, when you're germinating your tomatoes and eggplants, you're going to want a lid. And this is only until you see germination. Once you see something pop out of the soil, even if it's only a little tiny piece of plant, take the lid off. You don't need the lid after you've had enough heat down here to germinate. Okay? If you don't take your lid off, it just gets too moist for these seedlings. And then you could have what they call damping off, which is a little bit of a fungus that grows on the plant, and then it kills it. Okay? So take your domes off as soon as you see them germinate. And that goes for all of your seeds. Okay? All right, getting back to onions. This is what we call a flat tray. And it's got a little bit of a tray to give it some structure. This I fill completely full with soil, with seed starting soil. And I make 100 holes in this with a little device I have back at our house. And I fill each hole with 4 seeds, whether it be scallions, onions, shallots, or leeks. And those 4 seeds need about 10 to 12 weeks before I'm going to transplant them out. So these are some of the very first seeds I start in February. So I think I started mine around February 9th. And it's really fun to grow these onions if you haven't grown them already, especially scallions, because the scallions get planted out about 10 to 12 weeks after they seed in this tray. They don't need potting off. They stay in that tray until they go in the ground. And they will go in the ground about mid-April, mid to the 3rd week in April. The scallions, there's 4 seeds to a cell, and if they all germinate, all 4 plants get planted out in a bunch. They don't get separated. So they're easy to plant that way. You don't have to plant each individual one. Onions, leeks, and shallots, I plant off one at a time. But what's nice about onions is that they don't mind being planted with a bare root, without any soil around them. So I just pull them out of the tray and plant them one at a time. So onions are a lot of fun, and they can be planted and grown, I think, much easier. They tend to bulb up easier than the little bulbs that you would buy if you grow them from seed. Okay? And again, I would not need heat for these, but I would put a lid on until they germinate. The lid also keeps the moisture in, so once I water them well, I generally don't need to water them again until they germinate. Once the plants start growing, I would start watering them as needed every day or every other day. Okay. I also mentioned the kale, cabbage, broccoli family. Those are also early cold crops that you can grow. The thing about them is that you can start them without any heat. They germinate really fast, within 2 or 3 days. So you have to watch them carefully. I generally start them in tiny, tiny trays like this. There's 128 cells. This is the size I grow my kale and cabbage and broccoli in. So you don't need big pots. Those plants don't need to be huge when you put them in the garden. And generally, we're just growing these up to, we're growing these about 6 weeks before we put them in the garden. Okay? We usually do 1 cell per 1 seed per cell. And oftentimes your seed package will tell you what the germination rate is. Let's see if we see it on any of these. Sometimes they test them, sometimes they don't. I don't see it on here. On some of the commercial growers, they tell us what the percentage of germination is. And sometimes you'll see 80% germination rate. So that's really not a very high number. Sometimes I'll see 40% germination rate. And that will change my mind about how many seeds per cell I will plant. I mean, if it says 80%, I want to plant 20% more seeds in my tray to get the number of plants that I want. Okay, so germination rate is pretty important. Seeds don't last forever. If you have any onion seeds, scallion seeds, leeks, or shallots, and they're more than a year old, don't plant them. They won't do much. Things like beans and tomatoes, they'll last up, to 5 years. Lettuce, 5 years, but not all seeds last forever, and you're just going to get frustrated by them not germinating. Okay, so kale, cabbage, broccoli, 6 weeks. You're going to grow those seedlings until you transplant them out to the garden, and if you want to grow head lettuce grows very fast. You only have to have those plants, in there, and we grow them in these size trays as well. So lettuce only stands 2 to 4 weeks. Generally, 3 weeks is about right for lettuce, and they go in trays like this, and then they go right out into the garden. Okay. Celery and celeriac. I don't know if anybody grows those. I'm a big fan of celeriac. It's one of my favorite vegetables. Those are a very unique. Those and lettuce are very unique in that they need light to germinate. So if I cover it with a ton of soil, they won't germinate. They're just going to not do anything. Every other vegetable I grow, you have to have. I put soil on top of it, and it all depends upon the size of the seed. I'm going to pass this little jar around. This is one of the lettuces I grow. And you're going to notice that it has a clay coating on it. That's called pelletizing. When you grow seeds, you want to look for, or if you order them in a catalog, you want to look for seeds that don't have, that are not treated, okay? This is pelletized with a clay type product. I'll pass that around so you can look at it. And it just makes it easier for professional growers to put it in a seed machine and then use it in a seed machine. That's the only reason it's pelleted. But for home growers, you don't these seeds right here, the lettuce seeds, would not have any treatment, and they wouldn't have any covering on them. So that's what you want to look for, okay? If you see seeds that are bright pink or bright yellow, you want to just walk away from those, okay? Because those have been treated with something that you don't want in your garden, okay? Okay, so another important factor, I mentioned light for germination. Some flowers, if you're growing flowers from seedlings, will also require light for germination. So you just want to make sure that you look at the seed packet and make sure which one is which. So we talked a little bit about temperature, and we talked a little bit about which ones need light and which ones don't. The seed starting soil that Weston has here as a seed starter, which is pretty much all you're going to need. These have the vermiculite or the perlite in it, which helps to keep the soil loose and not compact. I'm just going to pass this around. This is the one that I use. It doesn't have any vermiculite, but that doesn't mean that growers don't use vermiculite. It's just that I don't. No reason, just that's the way it goes. You want to get a good seed starting mix because you don't want to use the soil from your garden, straight soil, and you don't want to use straight compost for your seed starting because it really doesn't have the right mix of nutrients that you need. So something like this that says seed starter, potting and planting mix would be great to use for your seed starting.
What's the difference between seed starter and potting mix?
The seed starter is going to have a little more nutrients. Because you're going to be having the plant in that seed starting mix for 8 to 12 weeks, depending upon what you're growing. It needs enough nutrients for that time period. And straight potting mix may not have it. So I know on my onions, sometimes if I'm late in planting and it's over 12 weeks of being in the tray, you can start to see that the nutrients in that soil mix have started to give up. And I'll need to fertilize that tray. Otherwise, seedlings don't get fertilized at all if you get the right seed starting mix. Okay, you shouldn't have to fertilize that plant while the seedling's growing. Okay. Okay. So Long Life Farm is a certified organic farm, and our family leads an organic lifestyle. That means we eat organic food. We don't use any chemicals on our lawn or our food. And we strongly recommend you use organic seeds. Now, organic seeds are going to enable you to grow in an organic fashion, and they have been bred in an organic system. And why is that important? Well, sometimes if you put a regular seed in an organic system without the same fertilizer and chemicals that have been used on it previously, it's not going to know how to act, right? So it's not used to that environment. And vice versa. If you put an organic seed in a traditional growing system, that's not how it was bred, and so it's just going to take a little bit more time to get used to it. So if you're not using any chemicals in your garden, I would recommend you use organic seeds. I'm also an organic inspector. During the wintertime, I inspect operations that are growing and producing food where they're using the USDA organic logo. So most of the seeds that I grow have to be organic because I'm a certified organic farm. So 95% of my seeds currently are organic. We have over 200 seed varieties, and there's plenty of options. Weston Nurseries has some really nice seeds here too, so take a look at what they've got. Okay, seed inoculant. Does anybody know what a mycorrhiza fungi is? Mycorrhiza fungi. I did spell it on here so you could know how to spell it. It's interesting that we know more about Mars today than we do about our soils. It's pretty incredible. But if you take about a tablespoon of soil, it's going to have more bacteria and fungi in there than our genes do. I mean, it's pretty amazing to think about the world of soil. And that's not what today's workshop is about. That's another all-day workshop. But I use a seed inoculant which has a mycorrhiza fungi in it. And the reason that's important is that 90% of plants synergize or have a symbiotic relationship with mycorrhiza fungi. And these fungi, if you've ever dug in the garden and you see these little white filaments, sometimes you might see them growing off of some bark or some wood chips. Those are mycorrhiza fungi. And the mycorrhiza fungi are critical to enable the plants to trade off nutrients. Okay? So they act like additional root hairs to plants and enable minerals and nutrients that are far away from the reach of the roots of the plant to be pulled in by the mycorrhiza fungi, and they trade off with the plant roots. So the one day that I'm out of mycorrhiza fungi inoculant, my plants do not do well. And when I put them out in the garden, it's just an amazing the difference. Most of our soils do not have this mycorrhiza fungi as they should. Our forests do, but most of our gardens don't. So I do highly recommend that. Nancy, this was the inoculant that you guys had here, right? Yeah. So this inoculant is for beans or any in the legume family. It's not the one that has the mycorrhiza fungi in it. So maybe there's a way that we could get one here, Nancy. I'll give you a couple different names of different companies. Peas need inoculants too because our soils don't generally have the rhizobium fungi, which is what peas and beans need. So this is a really good inoculant for those. And those are things that you can direct seed in the garden. You wouldn't have to start as seedlings. Okay? And how I use the inoculant is I either just put a pinch in the seed packet and shake it up, or I put some inoculant in my watering can when I'm planting the plant itself, so that it's at the root or seed level to grow and help the plant thrive. Okay. So light after germination. As soon as that seedling germinates in the tray, the lid comes off and it has to go under the light if it was in lettuce or celery or celeriac or a flower that needs light to germinate. And as soon as it goes in, needs light, lights are really kind of a critical component. I know a lot of people do seedlings on their windowsills, and that's usually when you get the legginess. They're stretching to get to the light. So if you can get the light closer to the plant within an inch or two, it's much, much better. And we historically have used standard shop lights without any special plant tube. And those, the white fixture that you would put in a shop light, basically. We've used those for the last 7 years. I decided, because LED prices have come down so much, to try LEDs. If you think about the shop lights, they calculate the light lumens in K measurements, right?
Kelvin, yeah.
Kelvin measurements. And I think sunlight Kelvin measurement is like 6,500. So the shop lights that I have are around 2,000. And I only germinate inside, and then at the end of March, this time of year, I'm moving all my seedlings that are growing out to a greenhouse that's plastic. Okay? So they don't finish off their growing inside, they're going outside in a covered environment. I just decided to experiment with some new lights, which are more like 4,500 Kelvins, and I was amazed at the difference. So if you are going to buy any lights, I would recommend that you start off with a higher Kelvin bulb, because the light intensity is just going to do that much more for the plant. photosynthesis, a lot of farmers are talking about now being sun farmers. They're sun farmers because the photosynthesis is the most important thing. So they're doing everything from putting foliar sprays on the leaves to enable the sun to be more attracted. The main objective really is not only to get enough nutrition for the plant to make itself, but after the plant has enough, it pushes all the rest of those carbohydrates down into the root zone. And why is that important? To feed all the microorganisms underneath. So we think of it like candies and cupcakes. After the plant has enough to make its own plant and fruit, it pushes out into the root zone and helps make your soil that much more fertile. So it's really important. Watering. So watering is a hard thing because nobody ever really knows does it need water or not. I can sit here and tell you, well, if it looks like it needs water, water it. But that's not always helpful. So I generally don't continue watering my plants until they germinate. But some of these seeds don't germinate for 2 weeks, and they are under heat pads, and it's drying out the soil. So those have to be watered. For example, the tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants that are on the heat pad, I generally have to water every day because that soil is really not that deep, and it dries out when it's heated. Okay, so I have to water these every day until they germinate. And then once they go into these size eggplants, peppers, and tomatoes, I generally have to water them every other day, basically. When the plants get bigger, they just need more water. So chard and lettuce, as they get bigger, they're just going to need more water. And with trays like this, you have to kind of make sure each and every cell gets water. I find that when I have somebody else do my watering, the ends don't get water and they die sometimes. But so we try and get all the cells moist and so forth.
Do you use a sprayer on seeds? Or
Yeah. Yeah, as gentle as you can be. There's all sorts of gadgets that you can buy that have a mist. Mist is what I use before they germinate, so I don't blow away all the seeds in the soil. And then as they get bigger, you can use the shower attachment and so forth. But yes, you'll need a good waterer or a watering can if you have a small enough operation.
What about putting them in a tray with a little water so let it suck up?
If you're going to be away for a weekend, yes. But I wouldn't leave the water there because they do need to drain. All of your trays and pots should have holes in them so they can drain. And watering just until the water starts coming out of the bottom is about the right amount. Okay. All right. I heard somebody say the other day, Nancy, that one of the Weston employees, there was a customer in here that said, oh, it died on me. And she said, well, how often were you watering? She said, probably twice a day. So that was not a good thing because the plant died. So hardening off, I am to blame about hardening off. I always get too anxious to get stuff in the ground, and I don't let them harden off, and I'm always kicking myself. So hardening off means that you're going to try and get the plants acclimated to the outside temperature. Okay, so even if you buy a tomato plant today, I don't know if you have tomato plants here today. Not yet. Even if you see a tomato plant at your garden center, do not plant it until it gets warmer. And even before you do, most of the plants that we see, unless they've been outside for a week or so, have not been hardened off. And what I have found that when I plant, let's say I've got kale, I put kale, it's out in my greenhouse, it's a beautiful day, the soil's not muddy, I'm planting. And then I get a sunny day, and they all die because the sun was too bright for them. They hadn't had a chance to harden off. This happened to my peppers last year because I got anxious. Thank God they came back, but it was just, it was death out there for a couple days because they weren't used to the intense sun. And so it's not only the cold, but it's the intense sun. I mean, these babies have been, in the nursery, and then they're in the kindergarten greenhouse, and then, they didn't even get a chance to go to grammar school before they're out, to do their thing. So it's really important to give them a chance to harden off. I have 3 to 5 days, I think I wrote on here. It could be as long as, a week to 10 days. Make sure that the first couple of days, they're not in direct sun. So if it's an overcast day, great planting day. If you've got an overcast day or 2, then I'm really safe about planting, right? If I haven't hardened off, that is. But so hardening off, I would take my pots or my trays out into the sun. If it's a really sunny day, maybe they spend a couple hours out there, half a day, bring them back in, and then bring them out the next day and get a little more sun. Maybe the third day is a full day of sun, 8 hours, 10 hours. Everybody getting the picture? Eventually, they're going to be okay to plant out on a really sunny day. But I would recommend transplanting out on an overcast day or a partly cloudy day. It's just going to help them and not stress them out, because a stressed plant is not a good plant. It's amazing to me when I think about, and I go to a lot of workshops this time of year, listen to webinars and listen to other farmers about how they're growing. And there's always a lot of good suggestions out there. And the stressed plant is one that we see all the time. The plant's potential is really quite amazing. A tomato plant, how many pounds of tomatoes do you get off your tomato plants? Anybody? Nobody wants to fess up?
Depends how many the deer eat.
Okay. So I generally estimate 10 pounds per plant. But the genetic potential of a tomato plant is well over 100 pounds per plant. If its genetic potential is never compromised. Stress is one of those things that compromises its genetic potential. Soil might stress it out too, but we generally have, you and I generally don't see plants that can get to 100% of their genetic potential. But we can do everything we can to try and make them move in that direction. So stress, root bounding is another stress. Drying out is another stress. Too much sun when they haven't been hardened off is another stress. They're pretty resilient, but they're going to suffer every time we try and, torture them that way. Okay. I wanted to mention Patrick, who works here at Western Nurseries, has got some awesome compost. And I ordered this compost for my farm because it's been approved for organic use. And all of the yard waste, usually, he makes them dump it out, and he looks for plastic and everything else. He's very particular about his compost. So I highly recommend the compost. If you were making raised beds, or if your current soil's not great, generally if you have a new house and it's been constructed, they've just put gravel and stuff in there that's not good growing, especially for vegetables. So I would recommend a mixture of compost and loam to make a mixture. You don't want straight compost. You want a mixture. And generally, it takes a long time when you make soil beds to get them in a position to be balanced.
What about when they offer?
We didn't talk about fertilizer because I think we're running out of time, but once you get your plants in the ground, especially this time of year with cold soils, temperature will determine what minerals are available in your soil. It might be there, but it might not be soluble for the plant to take up, especially when it's cold. So that's when a good fish emulsion, fish fertilizer, which I know they have here, is a good thing to mix with water when you're transplanting your plants, and also to use once a week or once every 10 days for a good fertilizer. Okay? But I do recommend you getting a soil test Without a soil test, you have no idea what your soil has to offer your plants. So it's really a good way. And UMass Amherst is our closest soil lab, so that would be the one that you would do. I think soil test is pretty inexpensive, at, $10, $15. It's well worth, so you're not wasting your money and your time on minerals that you don't need or fertilizers that you don't need. I thank you all for coming today. I appreciate it. And good luck with your gardens. And it's great that you want to grow in your backyard, because that's how you're going to get much healthier food for yourself and your family.
Laura, thank you so much for those tips. And I think I'm going to be on my way up to my plot at Holliston's Community Garden at Pinecrest. This is Deb Moore. Thanks for spending time with us at How Do Your Garden Grow?